How many of you here have ever been in a situation where you should have been proactive but you weren't? How many of you ever thought to yourself, I need to do insert action here, but for whatever reason you didn't? Well, if you said yes to any of those questions, then I would like to place you among the select few that I call the majority of the population on the planet. Now, that's not a supported statistic, right? But I'm sure we can all agree that there are times where we could have been more proactive, more productive. But for whatever reason we didn't. It might have been that meeting last week that you could have spoken up at, or maybe that one project that you could have started like a week earlier, but you didn't. But I'm here today to talk to you about what prevents productivity in group settings. But more than that, what prevents you from being a proactive person? Because proactivity is necessary in order to instigate our productivity. So let's start with the wait. I need to tell you the two things that do prevent productivity in groups. They are, in essence, just subconscious assumptions and the fear of failure. Now let's start with the story. Take a look around the room, especially at this wonderful sign here, and maybe think about what you saw in the lobby. Everything here was put together by a group of high school students. Now, some of you might be thinking, wow, these students must be pretty proactive, right? And you're right, we were pretty proactive. For the past 3 months, we've been working almost nonstop, doing like one task at least, completing at least one task a day, making sure that we were doing something to ensure that our event was successful. We raised funds, we sold tickets, we did publicity, we hired speakers, and we did pretty well. However, we weren't always so productive. Our first meeting was in the beginning of February. By the end of May, 3 months later, little to no work had been done. So what was going on here? Well, if you've ever heard of the psychological phenomenon known as learned helplessness, then you might have a bit of an inkling as to what it was. You see, learned helplessness is the kind of operant learning where some living learning being is exposed to adverse stimuli so many times that it learns that it can't do anything about it. It's helpless. Now, I believe a great way to explain how learned helplessness occurs is through this question. How does the circus keep its elephants from running away? Now, the story goes that a circus would acquire an elephant at a very young age, and then it would tie it down to a stake in the ground. And when the elephant is so small, it actually can't run away. Try as it might, it can't escape the bounds of the stake because the stake is too strong. But as time passes, the elephant grows. But the stake doesn't. So then why doesn't the elephant run away? Well, it's because it's been ingrained into the elephant that it can't do anything about it. It can't escape. There's no point in even acting, so why bother? So it doesn't even try. Now, in a similar way, the team was experiencing something that I call learned reliance. So learned reliance is similar to learned helplessness in that it is another kind of operant learning. You are learning something that's been embedded to you from a very young age. However, instead, we were learning to rely on some prerequisite from occurring before we could actually act ourselves. So we didn't think that we couldn't do anything, but we waited for something else to happen first. Now, in order to understand what our team was facing, what we were waiting for, you have to think about when you first started school. You might have been 5 to 7 years old, starting maybe pre-K, first grade, kindergarten. But what was the first thing that you learned? Was it to clean up after yourself? That teamwork is the best thing that'll ever work? Well, for me, the first thing was probably this, to raise your hand. And I'm sure that's the same for many of you. You see, in schools, we have to say, yes ma'am, yes sir, listen to your teacher, do as they say, make sure that they know what you're doing, because it saves you, right? You also don't want to get punished, get bad grades, get referrals. But in the same way, what we were doing was we were waiting for permission. Now, normally that's fine, right? Because in a business setting, maybe, you will have a manager, and the manager will check what you're doing. You might run your ideas by your manager to make sure that what you're doing is okay, it's in line with the company's policies. But in some enterprising situation like the TEDx event, you're given some rules and regulations. But that's it. There's no one to turn to ask, are these speakers good? Is this venue okay? Should we contact these sponsors? It's all up to you. So we had so much freedom, but we didn't know what to do with it because we were so used to waiting for permission, for asking the teacher what to do, that nothing happened. But wait, what happened to the students that, do whatever they want, whenever they want? They don't listen to teachers, they're rebellious. What about them? Well, you have to realize that us as a group, we were composed of pretty good students, right? We got good grades, we participated in class, we retained information well. But specifically because of that, learned reliance was even worse for us. Because you can learn the wrong lesson. It's the same way that bad habits are created. A person makes a mistake, and then they make another one. And then they continue making the same mistake over and over and over again until they don't even know that they're doing something wrong, until someone else points it out for them. In the same way, we learned from a young age that waiting for permission was the best way to go, even when it actually wasn't. So now that you know how we waited, and how that caused us to do nothing for 3 months, what happened to the fear of failure, right? I didn't really talk about that. Well, in order to understand how the fear of failure factors into our unproductivity, we have to think about diffusion responsibility. Oh, and by the way, subconscious assumptions are learned. But back to the diffusion of responsibility. If you've ever heard of the diffusion of responsibility, then you would know that it's the idea that in a group setting, responsibilities are diffused. Pretty self-explanatory. So, for example, if you were in a crowd, and you were much like the one that you're in right now, you might wait for someone else to clap first. How many of you are like that, right? I'm one of those people. I wait for other people to clap before I start clapping, right? So a lot of people happen to be the kind that wait for that one person to start clapping because we don't want to be wrong. We don't want to stand out, to be that random clap within the Tchaikovsky's symphony, because we don't want to clap at the wrong time. We don't want to stand out. And in the same way, in our TEDx team, we didn't want to make a mistake that would result in the eventual failure of our events. We didn't want to waste the time of our team members. We didn't want to waste that precious time to cause some loss. But ironically, that meant that all we did was wait, and we wasted our time anyway. So if that's really the case, then obviously this event shouldn't have happened, right? Something must have changed. Well, at the end of May, what we did was we got into a plane, we flew to the Himalayas, and then we meditated under a waterfall for 5 days straight. And during that time, we fought against our inner fears, and we pulled out from the deepest depths of our minds, the fears and the responsibilities and our subconscious assumptions and, okay, you get the point, obviously not. What we did was actually something really simple. 2 words. June 25th. We set a deadline. Now that deadline kickstarted our entire operation because that deadline meant that we had something to meet. It was the day of our speaker auditions, and that meant we had to get a couple of things done. We had to contact speakers, get a venue, we had to create a rubric, we had to do some publicity to make sure that people actually came to our auditions. And that meant that we had to do things without waiting, right? Because the diffusion of responsibility goes through a paradigm shift as soon as the first person acts, as soon as the responsibility is taken up. Because everyone on the team, we wanted to do work, we wanted to be successful, but no one wanted to start because we didn't want to be wrong. So now we know that the diffusion responsibility was basically cleared because we set that deadline. But what happened to the learned reliance, right? Because that didn't go away. Well, let me draw an analogy. Think about a sick man, right? So he's sad, depressed, he doesn't think he's going to do his interview very well. And then he reads an article by a Harvard psychologist that tells him, if you do this one thing, you'll be more confident. And so he does that thing, he strikes a power pose, right? And then he thinks, this is really silly. It's not going to get me anywhere. I'm just making an arm fist thing. But over time, he actually becomes more confident. He's happy. And then he aces that job interview. So in the same way, it's basically the fake it until you make it mentality. Because what we were doing was we were going through the motions, right? Because we had to act, even though there was no one to ask for permission. which meant that something had to take priority, the deadline or subconscious assumptions. And since those assumptions were subconscious, we didn't really know that they existed, the deadline took precedence. And so we went through the motions and we had to ask people no, we didn't ask anyone, but we had to get things done without asking. And by going through the motions, we ended up learning that we don't need permission to succeed. Now, in order to understand how a fake it till you make it mentality actually works, you have to think about it. Because some people disagree that fake it till you make it is a true statement, but really we're all born knowing the same thing, which is nothing. So no one is born as a pro violinist, no one knows how to code as soon as they're born, but everyone practices. It's all about practice. Practice gets you places. And so by practicing to overcome our learned reliance, we were able to succeed. And then now you've seen the products of all of our work. You saw 17 amazing speakers, a beautiful logo, and then you're all here learning the bold creative ideas that we have to share with you. So the next time that you find yourself in a situation where you could have been more proactive but you weren't, think to yourself, what do I need to unlearn? And then maybe set a deadline. Start small and continue working, and you'll be amazed at the things you can accomplish. Thank you.